Hi, Lee. Can you hear me?
I can.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you today?
Not too bad. So we'll just wait for another minute. There's a couple other people that are going to join here.
All right.
Are you guys harvesting down there?
Well, we cut a little bit and it got too wet, so we're having to wait for a while now.
Yeah, we're running into 26% corn, so we're kind of putting the brakes on for a little bit.
Right. We're all dry land. We don't have any corn. It's wheat and sorghum.
Okay. Yeah, there's some guys around us that got sorghum. And wheat's getting harder to find in my area anymore. I'm kind of in the northeastern corner of South Dakota.
I see.
So, all right, well, we might as well get going here. So this is just the Cash Cow homepage.
Right.
And basically, I just want to walk through a couple of things. There's a few, I write a blog every day.
Yes.
So not every day, but a couple of times a month I write this blog and I talk about, there's a couple of articles that we're in, the Cash Cow Farmer was in here with a few different news articles. And then I usually write about financial topics. And for those folks that don't like to read a whole lot, you can listen to the Cash Cow Farmer podcast. Are you familiar with podcasts?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's there anywhere. This one's 17 minutes. I talk about cash and from a financial perspective, you know, how important cash is, especially cash flow on your balance sheet, and to be able to cash flow basically is the most important thing, because businesses don't go out of business because they're not making money. They go out of business because they run out of cash. And, you know, a lot of the good times in farming has kind of put some farmers in a tight cash position to make payments and stuff like that. And so there's all kinds of stuff. There's another one about buying farmland and, you know, saving money, repairs, all this other stuff. So that's a good resource. And then secondly, I don't know if you know this, but every day, just about every day, we publish the grain market closing comments, and Craig Haugart, who usually writes the comments, lately it's been Lynn Miller. They just talk about what basically happened every day in the markets, whether it was a supply report or something like that. And then they love technical analysis. So you can see in the closing comments, there's always a few charts in there for corn, soybeans, and wheat. And then they just talk about the highlights of the day and some technical indicators and stuff like that. You can see these momentum indicators down here towards the bottom. So just a couple, those are totally free resources that, you know, you can use, and hopefully it helps you out. So I'm just going to log into the program. This is what you see when you first log in.
Yes. Yes.
So from here, the first thing you want to do is you want to start entering your prices. And this is step one. So once you get this out of the way, everything else is by a field basis. So you'll enter the year and then the number of acres that you produce crops on. So whatever it is, I farm about 7,200 acres of cropland. So we're going to go to a sheet that's already filled out, but you'll put the acres that you're farming in there. And the reason why you put your acres in there is because your operating costs, which is going to be your labor, your farm liability insurance, your machinery expenses, land expenses, all those expenses get divided out on a per acre basis to get you that interest. And I'll show you a quick way to find that. Do you use QuickBooks?
I do.
Okay, I'll pull up my QuickBooks, show you a report that's very quick way to find that. So we're just going to jump into a price list that I've already created. So once you start adding stuff, it'll look like this. 2015, 7268.8 acres is what I'm farming this last year. So as you add expenses, it'll pop up a little box like this, and we might have we got a couple categories in there just to keep people, you know, organized and whatnot, and give them some help starting out. But there's a lot of custom categories you'll find in there: administrative expenses, bank services, interest on your operating line. All these are going to populate when you're paying bills with your QuickBooks. All that stuff will populate, and then you can always hit the X to remove something. So I'll just show you real quick. This is in order to build a budget for 2015, I always look at 2014.
Right.
So to get here, I just go to reports, company and financial, profit and loss standard, and then
Right.
I'll just change the dates here to 1/1/2014, and then go over here 12/31/2014. And there you've got basically all of 2014's expenses. So, I mean, you've got some of these you're not going to want to put in your operating. Agronomy, for example, that's going to be broke down on every field. Bank service charges, stuff like that. Chemicals purchased, we'll add that in on a field basis. But some of the ones that stick out are like your fuel expense. You know, you're going to want to include that. Administrative expenses, any sort of grain assessments or elevator expenses, because every load they seem to find a few dollars they can take there. Any, you know, like employee health insurance. Let's see, what are some other ones? Payroll taxes, payroll expenses, like the labor expenses can be quickly calculated here. Any professional fees, you know, you hire a lawyer to look at something, to a land purchase or anything like that, you got that. Quad track. And then the rents are going to be, generally the rents will be in your land on a per field basis, but I mean, there might be a few machinery rents that you'll have in there. Another big one for me is small tools and equipment, and that varies obviously largely from year to year. You might have a bunch of, you know, upgrades and stuff like that. So that's basically, you know, stuff like that. Very easy to find these expenses, and then you can just throw them in there from your QuickBooks, and you can easily quickly build this operating cost. So you can see we've got repairs, insurance, you know, fuel tax, and then a couple of custom ones there. Any questions on that?
No, well, you know, the custom, of course, I thought that meant like custom cutting or custom, you know, custom machine hire work, but custom just means that you can make a custom category.
Yep, that's exactly right. So when you're looking at this in the non-edit mode, all those customs will just show up in here. Administrative, bank, you know, grain, equipment rental, those will just show up, and then you'll have the dollar amount spent annually on those custom expenses. Custom is just a custom category in this case, but we are going to get into some custom labor areas in just a minute.
All right.
So the next thing included in your price list is going to be the different costs of your various inputs, such as the next box is going to be seed prices.
Right.
So, for example, I've got a wheat one in here, but you'll hit the plus button and you'll select whatever it is that you've got, sorghum, you know, wheat, whatever it is. So if you got spring wheat or winter wheat, you know, let's say you got spring wheat, you can just select other there and then enter your brand and then the variety there, whatever the cost is per bushel.
Right.
And then you want to put the weight per bushel, 60 pounds per bushel there. I think we've got this same text box for a couple different seed categories. That's why we don't have it for every, you know, you just put the weight in there, and that way we can calculate if you're putting pounds per acre down. So, and if you're removing seeds, you just hit the X like that. So I've got a wheat example in this program here.
Right.
Some of them are different. Like you'll notice the soybeans, you got your brand variety, and then you got your cost per bag. Because the nice thing about soybeans and corn is that they're industry standard. You know, 80,000 seeds in a bag of corn, 140,000 seeds in a bag of soybeans. So there's no other calculations. We just need to know what you paid per bag, and then we'll be able to calculate those expenses on a per acre basis once you put in, you know, 30,000 plants per acre for a cornfield or something like that.
Right.
The next is going to be fertilizer. It's a little bit easier there's a little bit less data input with fertilizers. So you'll select urea, for example, and let's say, I think right now in my area, we're looking at 375 per ton. That's a dry application there. So you'll notice if you've got a liquid fertilizer like 1034, for example, it's
Yeah.
going to want to know the density. And we just make that a manual entry. And anytime you need to know, you can just put Google fertilizer density, and usually the first couple of links will just break it down by whatever fertilizer you're using. You know, if you're using kind of some concoction, the density is going to change.
Sure.
Right there. Just how many pounds per gallon, because liquid fertilizer, you buy it in weight and you apply it in volume generally. That's why we have the volume conversion number there. So that's fertilizer. The next thing would be chemical. I mean, you can see there's just tons of different kinds of chemical that we're using. You're probably in the same boat. So you can just put in, just type in the name and then whatever you paid per gallon. And if it's a dry one, then you'll put in per pound. Like if you're using bags of AMS or something like that, you'll just put in whatever the price is per pound. In the program, when you build each field, you just put how many ounces, whether it was dry or liquid, and the program will calculate that out for you. So there's no conversion necessary. So once you're done there, you just hit save, and that saves your whole price list there. And then all this is populated into a database on your farm. When you start entering fields, which your next step is to add a field, it'll pull up, for example, the seed planting. It'll pull up all the varieties that we built, because each variety has its own price and everything. So when you're selecting seeds and fertilizers and adding them as inputs on your field, you'll know exactly what the cost is per acre for those different seeds as you select different seeds and varieties for different fields. So I'm going to show you kind of, this is the nuts and bolts of the program. Once you get your fields in, which I'll walk through in a moment, you're going to have a summary page right here. And this is kind of the main deal, the biggest takeaway of Cash Cow is that you've got the economics for each individual field broken down right there. You know the profit and loss on every field that you farm, and it breaks it down by commodity. So the top box is going to be corn, and then you'll have a summary, a grayed out summary, which is going to have your averages, like it's a weighted average too, as every field's a different size. You know, you might have a 100-acre field. For example, we got a 90-acre field that's going to get 183, and then I've got a 259-acre field that's going to get 123. You know, that's going to impact your average yield differently. So we weight everything out so that this number is very accurate. And then most importantly, you've got the weighted average production cost for your farm. So, you know, if you start marketing, anything you start marketing over this $3.13 for my example here is going to be an income. And then exactly what kind of income. And the bankers, anytime you need to borrow money or meet with your banker about your operating line, I mean, if you show them this and you say, hey, we're not going to make money on every field. I mean, that's basically what the banker wants to know exactly. You know, okay, you're going to lose money on every field that we rent, basically. Not a lot, but at the end, we're going to make some money on soybeans, only $17 an acre. But, you know, any field that we've got to rent to, we're basically going to lose a few bucks there. And that's just the way the cycle is right now. So how this program will calculate your profit is it takes your break even for every field, and then it multiplies it by the cash price. And if you've contracted grain, like let's say you've got some $3.50 or $4 grain contracts in there, it'll actually apply those to your fields as well. And then anything that's unsold for an inventory based on your expected yield, it'll apply the unsold inventory at whatever the market is. That way you've got your profit every day. It'll change as the market changes every day.
And where does the price come from?
The price comes from the futures exchange.
And then do you set basis?
Yep. In the contracts page, you set your corn and soybean basis. The price, we've only got it right now for corn and soybeans that you can get it synchronized with the futures exchange. For other commodities such as wheat and canola, you're going to just have to take your local cash price I'll show you, like, for example, I just go to our local grain buyer, which is Wheat Growers, select my terminal here, and for wheat, I'm looking at 486. So I can just take wheat and then put a manual price of 486. Well, I could put the futures and the basis in there. So 541 is the future, 55-cent basis. I'll save that, and then it'll convert that to a cash price. And then once I go back to the field summary, you'll be able to see exactly what your profit is given those economics. For wheat, for example, I don't have a wheat built out here. I don't have any wheat on my farm. One other thing, when you're forward contracting grain, and I've got a few examples in here. Here's 4 grain contracts right here: price, the futures price, the basis, and then so we just got the cash price here. So you can see that some of this grain, there's 130,000, 70, 50, 50. So 300,000 bushels is already forward contracted. And the rest of it, the 117,000 bushels that's left, is left at the current market price, the current cash price. So it'll tell me my average cash price for sales is $3.53 based on the better contracts than the market right now. But if it was the other way, if the market was $4 and I had these 360, forward contracts, this number would be, I don't know, 370 or something like that. It'll take the size of each contract and then get the average that way. And then the same for soybeans. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, that's one of the best parts of the program, is it does all the calculations for you instantaneously as the futures change, so that you've got all that data at your fingertips. So I'll just jump into a field that I've already built out here. We've got this, our code name. That's the code name that we use on our farm. You might have the home quarter or grandpa's half section or something like that, the farmer's name. Then you've got your legal description right there.
Right.
If at any time you need to hire somebody to do something, the legal description is always in your program. Then you select the crop type that you planted on this field, how many legal acres are there, and then how many acres of the legal that you actually planted. The last part up here at the top is going to be your expected yield, which you can change at any time. If you have like a hail system go through and you think that, okay, well, I was hoping for 157, but I think it's going to be closer to 110, you can change that, and then that'll be reflected in your break even. Also, you've got the overhead cost. Now, each little box is gonna give you its own calculation in the fields page, which I'll show you in a moment. We can expand out the fields page to see further detail on our fields. So you've got your rent here. If you don't have a rent, you'll have your taxes, your real estate taxes, agronomy. And this could be your scouting agronomy. If you just pay somebody to go scout fields and then write you weekly reports or something like that, that's where that goes. Variable rate prescriptions. See, I have the agronomy in on a per field basis because I don't pay variable rate prescriptions for my soybeans, just my corn fields and occasionally the wheat fields. If, a lot of people in my area, if they're doing wheat, they might variable rate their fertilizer on wheat. So they'll have that extra cost on just certain fields. Then you've got your insurance, multi-peril insurance, and then any additional hail insurance right there. And then you've got any additional harvest costs, drying costs that are going to be on there that you want to add to the field. And an example of a harvest cost that might not be in there, that might not be already included in the overhead costs on the price list, would be, for example, if you got a field that's kind of way out in the boonies and it's costing a lot of extra fuel and manpower to get commodities delivered to the market, you could always put a few extra dollars in your harvest cost there per acre. Or if you're paying people in cash, sometimes people in my area request cash so they don't have to pay income tax on it, which doesn't show up in my QuickBooks account at that point. So I want to account for those extra expenses, and it might just be on cornfields. I might have another $2 or $5 an acre in expenses that are not accounted for in QuickBooks stuff. And then miscellaneous. these are just kind of available for any sort of use. If you want to say, okay, I want to make $100 an acre on this field, you could put $100 in that miscellaneous cost, and then when you save it, it'll show up in your break-even costs what you need to sell your grain at in order to make $100 an acre on that field. Any questions so far?
Well, all of mine is crop share lease. I don't have any cash wrap.
Okay, good question. I have a lot of crop share as well. So I'm just going to go back and we'll work on a field example that I crop share so you can see how I do it.
All right.
So this field is a crop share example. Now notice my expected yield is fairly low on a cornfield because I just put in 2/3 of what I fertilize and expect to get on that field. So this would be like 170 or 180 bushel cornfield, but I'm expected to get $117 an acre. So notice the insurance. The way I do my crop share, just so you know, is I pay 2/3 of fertilizer, chemical, and insurance and get 2/3 of the crop.
Right.
So I just calculate the inputs based on that. So this is 2/3 of the yield, and this is 2/3 of both the multi-peril and hail insurance. And then there's another column. If you do get hailed out and you get a payment, you can make account for that on a per field basis. So this is an insurance payment. Let's say you had some winter wheat or something, and it went to heck over the winter. In our area, there's a lot of winter wheat that went bad this last winter. So guys were getting, I don't know, $250 an acre in a winter wheat payment, and then they just planted corn or soybeans into that winter wheat. So this is how you would account for that, and that would be then it would offset some of those expenses that were specific to your winter wheat, and then you would see exactly how much money you would make on that might be corn crop after that. So this is for anything that, I mean, you can add expenses as income, or you can add income or expenses here, anything that we don't already have in there that might be unique to your operation. So that's there. And then you mentioned the custom applications, like if you were going to hire the harvest,
right,
and you just put in, whatever the custom cost per acre ends up being, and then however many acres they did. So you might want to go and look at your planted acres. See, there's 9 acres that weren't planted roughly. So I'll just put that in here for the custom acres, and then you'll want to put a date whenever it was harvested. Let's say it gets done on October 15th. So that's that application, that $40 an acre is going to be applied to that $290 acres. So the next thing is when you're planting, you'll select your variety, which we kind of touched on. You just hit the plus button. You might have a couple of varieties on there as well. Like you might have 290 or 150 acres of this Ray variety, and then you might have 150 acres of this Golden Harvest variety, on that same date there. So that you can easily split varieties as each one. This might be the Ray might be a $200 variety, as a Golden Harvest might be a $275 variety. So you really got to account for those different expenses there,
Right.
So that's how you split the planting area, and then it's only going to populate varieties that you built in your price sheet, and you might not have this many varieties. I planted a lot. I'm a dealer for corn for Syngenta, so I plant a lot of competitive stuff too, just to see if I'm planting the right stuff and what was the winning hybrid that year and whatnot. So there's mine might be a little more than most people have. And then fertilizer, just as easy. You select whatever fertilizer you've got out there. Notice I've got 2 urea examples. One of them is a fall prepay price, and one of them is an in-season price for those fields that you ran out of the prepay on or something like that. So I might have an in-season, and I put down 248, whatever you're building the budget. If you're working on 2016 already, which a lot of people are trying to figure out what their production costs are, then you're going to want to put whatever your agronomist tells you you're going to use. After you put the application, you'll update this number to what was realistically used. It might be 258. You might have used a little more than you thought based on, some overlap and whatnot. And then however many pounds per acre you put on there, the date, and then the acres that you put that on, 290. Actually, for some of these fertilizers, you might have the entire legal 299 acres applied rather than just the planted,
Right.
just because, a lot of times you can fertilize more than you can plant. So yeah, you do want to make sure that you account for that in your fields. So next is the chemical. It's just the same as fertilizer. You select whatever chemical you've got on there, how many ounces per acre, the date applied, and then the acres that were sprayed. And a lot of times the chemical, you're spraying more acres than you plant because those booms can get a lot further than that planter. So that way you've got the real exact costs on all that stuff. I'm not going to save this just because I edited a few things. So I'm just going to jump back into the summary page. When I expand this out, that's where you've got like all those operating expenses that we built up here in the price list.
Mm-hmm.
These ones right here, those are going to be, this is the average for me. Notice this number is the same. So it's basically the sum of those operating expenses divided by that 7268. And so that's on every field. I've met with a lot of guys that think their operating expenses are $60, $70, $80 an acre. And, I'm not one of those guys that buys new machinery every year, and I try and, do things as cost effective as possible. And, that's higher than most people would think for operating. So yeah, that's that. You can sort also. These up and down arrows allow you to sort. Like if you want to sort by, your lowest to your highest seed expense, or the other way, see which fields are your highest seed expense, fertilizer, that sort of thing. So I'll just sort by name for now. So you got your planted acres in this column, you got your operating expense, you got your overhead, and that overhead box is basically the rent, taxes, insurance, agronomy, that sort of stuff that shows up there. Any custom applications are going to be in this column. Seed, fertilizer, and chemical are going to be right there. And then at the bottom here, you've got the weighted average. So $119 an acre in overhead, $36 an acre in custom application on average for corn, 96 for seed, 66 for fertilizer. I variable rate every single field. So you're going to see fields that are, from the 40s to, and then you got the crop share as well. So that's going to definitely take your fertilizer cost down.
Mm-hmm.
And then the chemical, you can see a lot of these chemicals for corn can be $12, and you might have 24. Well, those are crop share fields, a lot of these $12 ones, so, and then you've got your weighted average yield, expected yield right there. And then you've got the production cost right there. So $59 an acre looks to be the income from this corn operation. Going down to soybeans at $17 an acre. So on average, the whole farm, which is the bottom one, you've got, and then it gives you a weighted average of each one of these columns as well. And then you've got $33 an acre. So another handy thing is you can click this blue button and it's going to toggle all these over to costs per field rather than cost per acre. So I'm just going to minimize this to make the data a little bit more digestible. So we've got 2,800 acres of corn, $1.3 million is the exact cost of farming that number of acres of corn. And then my output's going to be 417,000 bushels of corn. This is important because when those marketing opportunities come, you're going to want to know exactly how many bushels you've got coming out of the field based on what you see happening out there. And remember, you can change those yield numbers at any time to make them more realistic for what you're expecting as you do stand counts and counting kernels and whatnot on the cobs and doing that sort of stuff. So that's looking like the income for the corn operation, which isn't substantial, but this year I don't think a lot of people are looking for record-breaking income. So I just want to briefly cover the contracts page a little bit further detail now that we've gone through this. Do you have any questions on this before we move on?
I don't think so.
Does it kind of make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. So the contracts page now, as you sell grain throughout the growing season, or maybe after the growing season when you've got all the grain in storage, the most important number here is what you've got left. After you harvest, you're going to update all those yields for exactly what it was. So you're going to know your exact harvest production. And let's say that this year it was a little bit better. So I've updated yields and you might have a little bit more or less than what you projected. So you're going to know exactly how many bushels you've got left. So as the market presents good opportunities to sell grain, you know exactly what you've got left in the bin, and then you'll know where your price and profit levels are at that. So really easy to make a marketing contract. If you want to, if let's say we sold another 50,000 bushels of soybeans at that 330. So I'll just put one of my buyers, select the commodity, corn, which is just going to be a drop down like anything else there. And then you select the amount of bushels. So let's just say 50,000. And let's look at the corn for today. $397 and 68-cent basis. So we've got $397 and 60. What did it say? 67-cent basis, something like that.
And like our area, we almost always have negative basis. So, I mean, you just put in minus 67 right there.
In your area, you have a negative basis, so you're going to get more than the market.
No. I mean, our cash price would be $3.30 in your example. Is that what it would be in your example too?
Yeah. Yep. Looking at this, and this might be a little small. Let me zoom this in. So this is corn right now for us. We've got the futures price here, and then the basis. Yeah, negative 68. But the program knows that the basis deducts from the price. So you'll just put 3.97 as the futures price.
Right.
This is 67. But if you wanted to simplify it, you could just put zero basis, 3.30 in as the price and save that.
Okay.
And then it's just going to say right there.
We do have a positive basis with one buyer. And so you could do, instead of it being a 68 right there, you could do minus 68, I guess. And would it know to add to the price?
I don't know. Let me try it. So let's just say we got, we'll just stick with 330. So that's basically
97. Yeah, or that right there will work.
Yeah, 398. That would be the cash price with a 68 cents positive basis.
Right.
So notice that my average cash price really went up with that. That was only 50,000 bushels of the entire. This is the total production, 417,000. And our cash price before that was right around that 340 something. But because of this excellent sale here based on the remainders, it pushed that average sale price up by a significant amount. So yeah, that's how you do the contracts, and pretty basic. If you got to take one out, you can just delete it. It'll double check and make sure you want to do that. So we'll just remove that one right there, and we're back down 353, I guess, is where we were at before that contract. So that's really handy. And just a couple key things that I do with the program on a regular basis is before I go and negotiate 2015 or 2016 inputs, I'll look at the year before. Okay, I'll look at the year before on all my fertilizers. Like last year, 660 a ton. Well, maybe that was, let me look at 15. I've actually already started negotiating some 15 stuff. So 660 a ton for anhydrous is what I paid, or 430, 425 for 4600. So I've got everything that I paid for in 2015 right there at my fingertips. And so when I go to the co-op or whoever I'm buying my stuff from for 2016, and I'll share with you some of the prices on 2016. So I've got two co-ops here I'm quoting for 1152, Cenex and Wheat Growers. And then here's NH3. So it was 660 last year. One of them 630, one of them 625. Urea was 425 and 430 last year, 372 and 370. So I'll spend quite a bit of time negotiating, and this is kind of where you can get some hidden profit out of your farming operation by just knowing this information. I mean, a 5%, when commodities are down by 30%, a 5% decrease in the one of the largest inputs, which would be urea or NH3, you know, your end source, is not a really great opportunity to be locking in lots of fertilizer. So what I might do is just lightly fertilize this fall, or try and get them down to 620, you know, try and knock another $5 or $10 off, just negotiate and say, look guys, I mean, this is what we paid last year. This is this year, you know, I'll come and get the tanks, or we can store a little fertilizer at the farm or something like that, whatever we can get to get that price down a little bit. So that's one really handy thing is just having all of your prices, your historical prices right there. I'm working on, I haven't nailed down chemical yet, but you know, because we're looking to fertilize here pretty soon once we got most of the beans off. And let's see, having all that real handy, and then being able to identify opportunities and strengths in each individual field by that field summary page. I mean, that's just super important. If I'm losing 100, I mean, you might have a $4 an acre loss, or maybe a couple $20 an acre losses, but I've got all these fields here that I'm losing significantly on. I mean, break evens of $10, $9, $10. I mean, I don't know when we're going to see $10, $11 soybeans again. And, you know, that's not going to work to lose. And then here's an $80 an acre loss, you know, so looking into those fields and saying, okay, why am I losing so much money? And then obviously after you harvest, you'll update these expected yields. I mean, some of these fields just aren't that productive. And, you know, I've got a lot of seed costs in some of these fields for soybeans. I'm not sure why that one's 112. That might just be an error on the seed. But, you know, there's just great opportunities to jump in there and see, okay, where do we find opportunities here? You know, here's the overhead cost for some of these. Notice that the crop shares are next to nothing. And then the rental ground is just sky high. So I'm like, oh, okay, you know, how can I make money on these fields? And if I'm not going to make money on these fields, should I let them go? Should I tell a landlord, hey, appreciate farming your land. I don't want to make you take a pay cut, you know, and I just can't make money at these fields. I did an aggressive job marketing and sold, you know, a lot of the grain at good prices, but I just can't afford to farm fields at these prices. I can help you maybe find somebody else to farm the land, but you know, right now I just can't afford to do so. And if it's land that you own that you're losing money on, you can always consider putting it into CRP. I know we're going to wrap a couple quarters into CRP this year because, you know, 100 bushel corn and 30 bushel soybeans just ain't going to work. Because some of these costs you can't get down. If you're going to hire somebody to run around with the combine, they're plucking, you know, 100 bushel corn or 200 bushel corn, the cost is the same. And, you know, looking at productivity levels and especially if you get year after year into the program, you can look at these fields and say, okay, these fields are every year consistently losing me money. You know, part of the Warren Buffett wouldn't buy a company that constantly lost him money. If a company keeps losing him money, he's going to divest it or, you know, sell it to somebody else or something like that, you know? So,
right.
Yeah, just having all those expenses and everything organized and at your fingertips is extremely, extremely valuable. And this takes a little bit of time to get this data in there, which if you,
I know.
What's that?
I said, yeah, I know. That's where I quit.
Do you have a bookkeeper?
No. Well, I mean, I have an accountant that just does taxes, but I do all the day-to-day books.
The day-to-day books? Okay. One of the best things that helped me and might be an opportunity for you is I hired a bookkeeper that comes out to the farm once a week. And basically, she's out there for 4 to 6 hours once a week, and I pay her $25 an hour because she's got an accounting background, and she collects all the mail, pays all the bills, and does everything in that regard. And then I have her enter all this data in there for me. So, and literally she could do, I got about 50 fields in my operation here. She can do all of this in a day or two. And then I just have the data. And then I'll go back, and if something doesn't make sense, it might be a data entry error or something like that. But that's really helped me. And so we're considering offering, that sort of service, a full service with Cash Cow, just to help guys with the data entry, because I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
So if we can help people, they'd have to send us, some of their QuickBook report, the one that I showed you, and then, a couple of their statements and their agronomy stuff, and we'd be able to do everything for them for like probably charge like an hourly cost for that, as the smaller operator wouldn't take that long. But we've got guys that got 155 fields in the program,
Wow.
So it's just crazy. Over 40,000 acres in the program. So yeah, but any questions?
No, I don't think so. Up there on your tabs that you're going across, you haven't got to account yet. I assume that's just your information, contact information.
Yeah, the account's basically, your profile, subscription details. So you've got a 30-day trial.
Right.
And after that, you're going to want to upgrade to keep the service active. So everybody gets to try it, of course,
Sure.
So we want to make sure. I mean, I don't want people to pay for it if they're not going to use it, or if it's just not something for them. So everybody gets 30 days for free. And then if you've got less than 25 fields, you'll go the basic route. And then if you've got over 25 fields, 25 to unlimited fields, you'll go the Pro Plus route. And then you'll just upgrade
Right.
the credit card. So that's basically.
Mine would be less than 25.
Okay. And I mean, competitively, there's a couple competitors that have farm financial software like we've got. It's designed by accountants, so it's not quite as intuitive as this software is. And I've never seen one that breaks it down on a per field basis like this. This is what you want to see as the manager. You want to see which fields are making you and losing you money, so that you can get in there and figure out, okay, how am I going to get more yield or less inputs on this School 40 piece? How am I going to make that field work? And it better off just putting in a government program, collecting $100 a year and not doing anything with it. How are we going to make that work? So you can't figure that out unless what each individual field's potential and resource capability is. So, and by the way, granular. So I'm 7,200 acres. I did the Granular is the competitive. You feel free to check them out, granular.ag. It's a lot of data entry. It makes this program look like a half the data entry, because you almost feel like you got to hire somebody full time. Every single operation that you do on your farm, you'd have to create a job order for and apply chemicals and all this other stuff. It's quite a lot of work. It was $22,500 for my 7,200 acre farm. And I was like, holy man, you take 22,500 and then you add another, boy, I'd have to have the bookkeeper come out twice a week just to manage the inputs on the granular program. I'm just like, man, that's another, $200-300 a week in addition to that. So I was like, man, this just ain't going to work. And I talked to other guys just recently that have been approached by Granular, seen it, said, yeah, it's definitely a good program, but man, the cost versus return, I don't think you should spend money unless you're going to get a 10 times return on that investment. I mean, with fertilizer, obviously we got to buy fertilizer and we might just get a 50% return on that investment. But when it comes to software, I think you should be able to get a 10 times return on your money. And I think it's pretty easily, for somebody that pays $750, I think it's pretty easy to get a $7,500 return on that investment if they're using the software right.
Oh yeah.
So
I think that I'm gonna try to make and use it. It's just going to be a matter of me sitting down here and doing it. So, making because, to sit here at a computer and enter data for a day, even if it's only for a day, is not much fun. But, it's something that, once you have it set up, it'd be easy to do.
Yep.
So, and the other thing I can see, one little hindrance, I guess, and you just, like on your inputs, the chemicals, those change throughout the year. And so you would just have to do like you did and put in some dates, I guess.
Yeah. PowerMax, for example, I've got the in season at 19 and the prepaid at 18. And I usually know which field I run out of prepay on,
Right.
or pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't want to kill yourself with your data entry and trying to make everything perfect, because being a penny off on a farm is actually very, very accurate,
Sure.
But
well, and the other thing I was going to ask, like back on that field summary page we were just at, that one, your cash price at 330, that was calculated based off of your contracts age.
Cash price is
that in for each field.
Yeah, the cash price right here is based off of, we take the previous day's closing futures price. So whatever the futures price closed at yesterday, that's
Right.
what we use for the cash price. And then you'll manually put in a basis. That's for corn and soybeans. But if you got wheat and sorghum in your case, you're just going to go in and you're gonna put a manual price in there for wheat.
Right.
541. Maybe you just want to put in the cash price and not worry about the basis. It's up to you. You could just look at whatever wheat is. 486. So 46 would be, let me just put 0 for basis, save that. So that would be your wheat price would be 486. So it'd take all of your uncontracted grain and price it at 486. So that's what this price applies to any of your grain that's not sold. So in this example, I've already got some contracts for about 3/4 of the corn. So it'll take those contracts and apply those for 120 bushel per acre here. Basically, 90 bushels already been priced, and the 30 that's left over is going to be priced at that 330. But the profit will take into account those grain contracts. So the profit takes into account that you've forward contracted some grain, and then whatever you haven't forward contracted is going to be priced at the market. So if you got a simple example, if you got half of your grain priced at $4 cash for corn, and then the other half at $3, it's going to apply that's pretty simple math. Half and half would be $350 would be your average price. So it's going to price your yield. It's going to take 350 times your yield and then deduct from your break even to figure out your profit.
Okay. Well, and one thing that is probably not a normal situation, but like here right now with one of our buyers, which is a pig farm, they're letting us contract on an acre basis by field. And so, the program wouldn't really allow for that. Because, like for example, I can have, your school 40 field right there, with a price locked in that's different than any other field. And it's just that field by itself. But that's probably getting a little too deep, because that's not something that happens very often.
Yeah, that's a little bit unusual. One way you could possibly account for that is by going in there to the other overhead area. And if this field's going to make an extra, if you figured out, okay, well, I got an extra like $10 or $20 an acre,
right,
in income because of that, well, you can add, pig farm, $25 an acre in income and save it, and then it'll adjust your production cost that way.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I mean, the nice thing about this thing, the beauty about this thing is it's all formulas, which you can manipulate things as you see fit. You can change it and say, okay, well, let's say I got 100 bushel yield, or let's say I've got 160 bushel yield. And if you've got a quarter of land that the landlord wants to bring the cash rent to 150, well, you could put 150 in there and then save it and see how that changes your production costs. I mean, the amount of stuff that you could, farmers are always calculating things in their head. Okay, well, this guy just bid, $300 an acre for rent on this stuff. What would it cost? What's he going to need to break even? I know what he's going to get for a yield out of there, and I can take my production costs. So if this guy's paying $300 an acre for rent, how much money is he going to make or lose, or what's his break even? And then you can save it, and it'll show up there.
Right.
Lots of guys are signing up for the program just to see if they're going to lose money on their rental contracts that they've got a little high rent on.
Yep. Okay. Well, I mean, it's a great program and something I've needed to do for years. So, put out the effort to get it done.
All right. Well, Lee, really appreciate. Thanks for the time. Feel free to email or call at any time. More than happy to walk you through something again or whatever it takes. I'm pretty sure that this is going to make a little YouTube video I can share with you that you can actually, if you wanted to train somebody, like if you wanted your daughter, or if you wanted, maybe a bookkeeper you hire down the road to do this stuff, you could share with her this video, and you'd have, automatic training session here. Right. So, yeah.
Also, I was going to ask, I mean, in reading about this program, your dad is the one that invented the Anderson opener. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
That is, and now partnered with Horsch, I guess.
Yeah.
So y'all are the Anderson and Horsch Anderson.
Yep. My dad started that. My brother runs that company and they do most of production now in Mapleton, west of Fargo, up there in North Dakota.
Right.
Yep. But that's same Andersons.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. That equipment is very high quality, and I really wish we had some of it, but there's no dealers down here. And
where are you at, Lee?
Near Amarillo, Texas.
Oh, Amarillo. Okay, there's a couple. I know there's a couple jokers down there. Right.
Yeah, but I'm interested in the wheat drill or air seeder.
Yep, that's what I use. I use that air seeder for soybeans. I use it for all of our fertilizer application. That air seeder pays for itself every single year I use it. I just love the thing. And I use one of the old ones, one of the ones that was a prototype in 2003. And so I've got a 12-year-old air seeder, and just as good. They're almost indestructible. Every once in a while you'll get a crack in the frame, especially if you got rocky ground that takes a little abuse. Just weld it up and you're ready to go again for a couple thousand acres. But we put on that air seeder about 6,000 to 8,000 acres every year, because we go over almost every acre with it, because we're either fertilizing for the corn or we're putting down the beans in 15-inch rows. And yeah, a machine that's so simple. I can teach somebody how to run it in about 2 hours. That's by going through how to replace the openers and watch for wear on that and whatnot. And yeah, it's good stuff. You could actually, if you're in the market, I know the used equipment market right now is pretty beat down. And those air seeders, even if you didn't have a dealer nearby, you need a handful of spare parts on hand. Couple openers, a couple shanks, a couple, shank holders, and a few tires. And, the bearings are standard bearings. Everything else, a little bit of extra hose, and then everything else, you're pretty set.
Right. Well, it's not in the budget right now, but Maybe someday.
Yeah. What are you
So,
using right now for drills?
on our sorghum, we use a rigid planter and then a John Deere planter. And we trade that every 2 years. But then on our wheat drill, we're actually still using a John Deere 9300 hoe drill, 40-foot set of box drills.
Sure.
You know, they're real popular around here and 12-inch spacing, but John Deere quit making them, and so we've got a set that we had since they were new, and keep them in the barn, and they look brand new. But as our acres keep growing, someday we're gonna have to get something bigger. But
Yeah. Are your kids involved in the farm?
not yet. Their daughter's 13 and son's 10,
Okay.
so they will be though.
Yeah, that's good. Keep the next generation interested. In my area, when I go to a precision planting event or something like that, the average age of the farmer in there is probably 58, high 50s, and there's just one or two guys that are under 40, and everybody else is kind of older. And it's just, you think about the responsibility of the next generation to take on more acres and more risk. It's just more. You really have to understand the financial side of farming if you're going to make that work.
Yeah,
So,
well, and something that got me, actually, the reason I found this the other day, I had a meeting with, and I really just have two landlords. One is my dad. I lease a half from him, and then the other one I lease a couple thousand acres from. And I just converted that about a year ago from custom farming to leasing it on a crop share basis, and he was not being real thrilled about that and complaining that he gave up all his income whenever he let me lease it instead of custom farm it for him. So I was able to put a spreadsheet together, which if I'd had this program going, it would have done it for me. But I put a spreadsheet together to show him that actually, by leasing it to me, that he made a $45 an acre profit instead of a $10 an acre profit. And so that was impressive to him. Of course, it showed me that on one field I'm losing $10 an acre, which I had not realized. So you can see, some fields aren't worth farming, and or you may have to farm them anyway to keep the rest of the fields. But you got to be careful. Just well, God told me a long time ago that when you're losing money on every acre, the answer is not to farm more acres.
yeah, that's true.
So
True.
anyway, well, I don't mean to hold you up, but I enjoy the visit and the help on the program, and I do intend to try to follow up here and get going with it.
Okay, I'll follow up with you. When are you guys done with harvest?
It'll be a couple more weeks, and we haven't planted wheat yet. So, here the next 3 or 4 weeks are going to be really busy.
Okay, I'll maybe call you. I'll call you like mid to late November and see how you're doing.
Okay, that'll be good.
So, all right, Lee. Well, thanks a lot. Appreciated the time as well, and have a good rest of your week.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Yep. Bye-bye.